Well, let me just begin by saying I'm Jared, and I'm excited to be here this morning. We're actually going to be taking a little bit of time, too, so we'll be here some Sundays, not all Sundays, in the next couple months. Will be really weird since I've been here every single Sunday since we launched. It's going to be really, really weird. Let me also say this week has been amazing. Just a lot of things that, God's been doing and things that, the question we talked about, I want to say 2 weeks ago, of people who are on our radar, praying for, literally being led by the Spirit, like being attentive to the Spirit, and the Spirit's leading, and it's really something I wanted to practice, us as a family we wanted to practice. And so this past week, I got to see and meet all these people. I'm like, Lord, bring some people to us, and also bring us to those people. And so within one walk, we went for a family walk, and it was pretty awesome because, part of it, we have a St. Bernard, so people tend to say, hey, I haven't seen one of those things in years. But there was people who we hadn't seen. We saw Dado, we saw, other neighbors that we hadn't seen in a while, and other people we didn't even know who lived in our neighborhood. They're like, hey, you guys live in the neighborhood? And we're talking, and some people we got to pray with. And then later on, we went to Walgreens. I had to pick some things up, and I was just like, I saw the lady at the register, and I've seen her, she's new, and I was like, what happened to your foot? She said, I broke it, I fell in aisle 9. And I was, I didn't know Walgreens is that dangerous, but she said, no, and I actually did say that, it's stupid, why? And she goes, no, she said, I've had a hairline fracture for quite some time, and it's just been a nagging injury. I was like, well, I kind of pray for you. She was like, yeah. She goes, well, while you're at it, she said, would you pray for my husband? Because he just started having epilepsy seizures and finds out he has a brain tumor. Looks like he might not only have a couple months old. And I'm like, oh, my goodness, So we're praying for this lady, and there's other people who are starting to get in line, and they're just like, what's going on? They're slowing down the line. But I was just thinking, I was like, all these, and it was just constantly interaction after interaction. The Spirit was just doing some amazing things. It was like, are we attentive to the Spirit in your neighborhood, wherever? And so just as an encouragement to all of us, praying for people and praying for the opportunities to get to know our neighbors, and just small little conversations where they actually open up and share the brokenness all around them and all around us, that we get to shine the hope of the gospel to people and let them know we love them, regardless of what season they're in. In fact, later on that night, I even saw our dog laying down, and this doesn't have anything to do with the sermon this morning, so you can just cut it out. And so I don't get to do this for another couple months, so I'm going to build it. No, I'm just kidding. I'm joking. But this is pretty funny. I see Jameson. He's now about 100 pounds, 6 months old, and it takes a lot to get him off the ground. But I look over, and it was just kind of dusk, and I look over, and here he is, completely sound asleep, and all of a sudden I see something kind of go over by him, and he pops up like a cat. For anybody who has a cat, if you spook them a little bit, they just fly up in the air. He did that, and that's a lot, like 100 pounds going from dead sleep to up in the air. I was like, whoa, what is this? So I went over to see him, and I looked down, and I see something kind of moving around, and I look down, and out of nowhere, the thing flies up and lands on my chest. It's a bat. And I'm like, whoa, and I'm just like, oh, like throwing it down. And so the bat's stoned, I'm stoned, Jameson's looking at me like, what's going on? And so then I'm like, but I gotta take a picture. Nobody's gonna believe me. That bat flew on my chest. So I'm like taking a picture of me, just getting stunned every time I let the flash. So I eventually get him with a tennis racket and set him loose in our neighbor's yard. And, good neighbor, right? But I was like, man, all these things are taken. That was kind of the cap of the night. I'm just thinking of all these conversations sitting there, and I'm like, man, God, you're so good, and may we be attentive. We get so busy with things, and we can easily miss life right before our very eyes. So I just wanted to encourage you guys in that. For those who don't know, we are in the book of Mark, the gospel of the servant Savior, the one who changes hearts, the one who saves sinners and transforms communities unto himself. Now we get our title from Mark 10:45, that the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. let me begin by saying this, and then we're just going to dig into our passage this morning. Whenever we make exchanges, we always want to exchange up. We never down. We always want to make a better exchange, not an exchange for the worse. If you're going to get a car, you always want a newer model with less miles. You don't go and say, this car's been great, give me a junker. We never say that. When you upgrade maybe to a different home for your family, you always say maybe another bedroom, maybe something that has less work to do. When you're newly married, sometimes you're like, let's get a fixer-upper and do everything, sink everything into that. But then after usually that fixer-upper, you start saying, maybe we don't want to do all of that next time. Amen. Right? You're like, preach. We always want to exchange up, never down, never back. And this is where we're going to be going this morning. We're going to be talking about the exchange that leads to the greatest exchange ever. Yes, Sean will be unpacking next week. The greatest exchange. So I don't want to go too much into that. But the exchange that we are going to be talking about today is the major setup for the cross. That it is the on-ramp to the cross. That's the exchange. It's literally the ramp to Jesus being sentenced to death, where he's actually going to take the ramp down from the platform where he's with Pilate to be beaten to a bloody pulp, gets scourged, whipped nearly to death, to the point where people can hardly even recognize who he is. And then he's going to exchange that for a cross on his back. That's where we're going this morning. That this exchange that we're going to see that leads to the greatest exchange is something that we're going to see that it's not just a nice story, a story maybe many of us have heard before, but it's the exchange of taking blood, guilt, wrath, and judgment on himself and setting the guilty free. Tim Keller, for lack of not reinventing the wheel, has given 3 terms for this passage, and I think they're helpful for us as we walk through. So this is what I'm going to use his terms. I'm not using his words. I'm going to use his terms for this morning. And Jesus' ambiguity and how he responds to Pilate. We're going to look at Jesus the revolutionary, and then we're also going to look at Jesus the substitutionary servant king. So those are the 3: Jesus' ambiguity, Jesus the revolutionary, and Jesus the substitutionary servant king. If you have your Bibles, you can turn to Mark chapter 15, 1 through 20. We're going to get after it. I divided it up into really those 3 sections this morning with the help of Dr. Timothy Keller. I don't know what you guys call him. Some of you call him Keller, Timothy. I would call him Tim, TK. Beginning with verse 1. And as soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council. And they bound Jesus and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate. Let's pause here for a second. Now we know that the Jews could not execute judgments. The Jews did not have that power. They needed to go to the Romans. That the Romans adopted the form of execution, that of crucifixion, from the Persians who actually invented it. It's pretty wild too. Even the psalmist talks about this way that the Christ would suffer before it was even invented, back in Psalm 22. But the Persians invented it, the Romans adopted it, and it was, to say the least, a major deterrent. So when people would walk on the road and they would see these people who were crucified, sometimes for up to weeks, in this case it was only a day for Jesus that we'll talk a lot more about next week. But the Romans wanted people to see. Look at what happens to resistors of Rome. Go ahead, take a good, long look. Only criminals, actually brutal criminals, and really terrible people were executed in this fashion. There are lots of other ways to punish people, but this was the way that they say, you go against the government of Rome and we will do something horrific, and we want people to know what you've done. That's where the Jews come in. They want Jesus executed in this way. Why? Because they know that the law says in Deuteronomy 21:23 that cursed is every man who is hung on a tree. They know this. They want the people to look at Jesus as cursed and not as one who's blessed by God. That's why they are now here before Pilate. They've already been beating Jesus, mocking him, spitting on him in private in an unfair trial, and now they have him before Pilate. And we go to verse 2. And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Question. And he answered, "You've said so." Here's Pilate saying, "Are you a king? Are you a political person? Is that who you are?" Pilate doesn't care if he's a Messiah or not. He doesn't believe in that. He doesn't care. That's from the Jewish perspective. He wants to know, are you a king? Are you a political figure that I need to be worried about? And look what Jesus says. Look what Jesus says. You said it. Those are your words. He kind of answers with a yes and a no. There's a little bit of ambiguity here. The last time we see Jesus do this was when he was in somewhat, sort of on trial before some of the chief priests. When they say, this is what we're going to do to trick Jesus, we'll get him arrested and killed pretty quickly, just by his response. We have lots of witnesses. Back in Mark 12. Jesus, who should we pay taxes to Caesar or not? They ask. In other words, if he says yes, then he's a sympathizer of Rome and the Jews are going to hate him. If he says no, then the Jews will love him and the Romans will have to execute him. Yes or no is kind of a bad way to do it. What does Jesus do? Almost the same thing there as he does here. Jesus says, give money to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what's God's. It's a yes or no. Chief priests accused him in verse 3 of many things. Now we know that there's already things that they've been accusing him of. They've been trying to get false testimony after false testimony, but these are some of the things that they want to bring before Rome. They can't say he's been doing blasphemy because they're not so worried about that. They need to bring up some charges that the Romans would actually care about and worry about if he was who he said he was. One of those is probably saying he's a king. He's a political ruler who is going to thwart the power of Rome. Another one, they're saying he's probably the guy who says we shouldn't pay taxes. And another one, he's going to be starting an uprising, a treason against the government of Rome. Probably another insurrection, like some of the people who've gone before us, which would catch the eye of the Roman ruler. Verse 4, and Pilate again asked him, have you no answer to make? See how many charges they bring against you. But Jesus made no further answer, so that Pilate was amazed. Now there's some nice stuff here. It's pretty amazing to me. We see Jesus. What kind of revolution has he started? Radically loving people willing to lay down his life for people who don't deserve it. That's the kind of revolution that Jesus has started. And he's silent. Fulfilling scripture back to Isaiah 53. That he would not even open his mouth when being assaulted, when being mocked and ridiculed. Silence. His actions will speak far greater than words at this point. There's no reason for him to say anything at this point. The whole purpose for why Jesus has come is to go to the cross. That was his entire mission as in perfect humility before the Father to come to the earth, to die. For the sins of those who believe. And Pilate is amazed. Now this word amazed is a pretty fascinating word, because sometimes when we see this word in Scripture, it's actually like, this is crazy. Come on, Jesus, you should say something here. But that's not the word. It's actually used in a positive sense for amazed. He's amazed that Jesus, who is on trial for his very life, is not feeling any reason to defend himself. He knows he's innocent. Pilate is amazed that Jesus would not say anything or fight or anything. In fact, those who walk with Jesus, you can see some of these things. Followers of Jesus, the early church began to do this. They started to set a precedent. Not at this point, a lot of them are terrified, and they're in hiding until Jesus rises from the dead. And then they're filled with the Spirit of God, and they actually go and proclaim and even lay their lives down. And almost all of the apostles, with the exception of one, are executed. Within the early church, Christianity started growing at alarming rates. And a lot of people said, why is that? Let me give you a name. And if you have not read this book, let me just encourage you. It is a fascinating book. Rodney Stark. If you've ever read Rodney Stark's book, The Rise of Christianity, it's awesome. He basically makes a whole bunch of notes on what was so amazing about the rise of the church. It wasn't that they read more books on what you do to fulfill seats. That's not what it was. It wasn't that they went to new church seminars or saw some great speakers and then they said, oh, let's be passionate now. No, that's not what they were. Spirit-led, and they actually did the words that Jesus commanded them to do. They loved radically and laid their lives down. They didn't fight in resistance to the Romans. In fact, many times they were brutally executed in the Colosseum. But one thing that Rodney Stark mentions in his book, which is super fascinating, is all the people that nobody cared about, that we said they're too far gone or they're not worth our time. Christians loved those people radically. It started with some little girls who would be born into their family, and families didn't want little girls to be born. So they would throw them in these garbage heaps. And the Christians would actually pull these little baby girls out of the garbage, and they'd bring them into their home, and they'd raise them as their own daughters. Sometimes thousands, hundreds of thousands of little girls. Christians would take in all the marginalized, the prostitutes, the old. This person is probably past the time of life where they can actually make a meaningful contribution to society, so we should just send them away. They took them into their homes. We don't have grandmas yet over here. They've killed our grandmas. We can use some more. Then a plague broke out, and almost a third of the population died. What was fascinating that Stark records is this, that in that plague, when everyone is running to the hills, everyone is trying to get out of the city, the Christians are moving into the city. And they're taking these people who have been infected into their homes, and they're starting hospitals. And dying alongside some of these people who have the plague, some of these people who have been infected, and they said, we have hope. We want to show you hope too in the midst of that. The world took notice of Christians because they said, this is what Jesus did, and this is what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Take up our cross and follow him. Going to all the people, all the radical people that nobody wanted to go to, the Christians. Let's go to us. Let's go to them. Let's go to all people. Not just people like us, not just people who we like, but the people who will actually show how messy life is. And I think that's something that we need to pay attention to when we look at Jesus' silence, or we look at the way that the early church did things. The revolution of radically loving people. Because every single person has been made in the image culture will be amazed too. When we do like what Sean had just mentioned, we say it's not about the building, trying to get people into the building, but we realize that we are the church. We have the Spirit of God. Jesus said, He knows He's innocent. He doesn't have to say anything. He knows He's hours away from the cross. And we get to verse 6. Now at the feast he used to release for them one prisoner whom they had asked. Who is he? This is Pilate. Pilate knew that the Jews had a tradition where every year at Passover they could actually release somebody who was in jail, somebody who has been imprisoned or incarcerated. It's just like, this might be Jesus' king. I've seen some things that they have said about him, and I don't see any of that. This man is innocent. This might be an opportunity for Jesus to be let off the hook. We get to verse 7. And among the rebels in prison who had committed murder in an insurrection, there was a man called Barabbas. Now, we have this story of Jesus getting close to the cross. It seems like it's getting more scandalous. It's getting more intriguing. It's getting more intense. Jesus has been beaten and flogged and spit on and mocked, and now he's on trial after trial after trial, and then Barabbas shows up. Like, there's kind of an interruption in the story of Jesus. Right? What do we know about Barabbas? All we know is that he is basically a rebel or a murderer who's led an insurrection, which is basically an uprising against Rome. He's been committed to prison, rightfully so. Probably supposed to go to the cross, they say. Probably. And here's Barabbas. And the crowd, in verse 8, came up and began to ask Pilate to do as he usually did for them. He answered them, saying, "Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?" For he perceived that it was out of envy that the chief priests had delivered him up. The chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release for them Barabbas instead. What is the crowd chanting? Substitution! That's what they're chanting. We want a substitution. Jesus stirring up the crowd. We want a substitution. Pilate's a judge. He's got Jesus and Barabbas. I'm going to put them before you right now to show how ridiculous your claims are. Barabbas here, Jesus right here. Pilate's probably thinking to himself, this is absurd. Jesus probably hardly even identified at this point he's going to get beaten again. Standing there, knows that nothing worthy of death that Jesus committed. He knows a lot about that. He's thinking, what is Jesus saying? I can't think of anything. How about Barabbas? He's a murderer. He's a rebel against the Roman government. That's what we do know. Why would they want him set free and him to go to the cross? Why? Look at this before you, people. It's essentially what Pilate is saying. What do they do? Say, we want Barabbas. Give us Barabbas! Jesus has done nothing but heal. Love radically. Free people from bondage, and that's about to happen right here as well. Verse 12, and Pilate again said to them, "Then what shall I do with the man you call the King of the Jews?" In Luke's Gospel, we're told that Pilate's wife has a dream. And she goes up to Pilate and whispers in his ear, she says, "Have nothing to do with this innocent man. For I have suffered much or greatly on the comfort in my dreams. It's pretty much says, have nothing to do with this innocent man. His wife says that. Pilate knows that. He knows Jesus hasn't done anything. And here is Barabbas, this rebel guy who was murdered in prison, rightfully so. And what do? 13, they cried out again, crucify him! And Pilate said to them, why? What evil has he done? And they shouted all the more, crucify him! So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released for them Barabbas. And having scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. Even the Roman rulers who were alongside him, the court, and the soldiers who are now walking up to Barabbas, walking past Jesus, unlocking his chains, and setting him free, giving him freedom. Barabbas walks down from this uplifted platform for all to see, thinking, I had no idea what just happened. I've been preparing for my execution all week. In fact, I probably already ate my last meal, breakfast. I don't even know who this Jesus cat is. I know that I am guilty. He knows. I know the law. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. I deserve that. It's probably what he's thinking. And then he goes down to his friends. They welcome him. And he's thinking, this is my friend. Set me free. The people set me free. It was the love of the Father that set Barabbas free. It was the love of the Father that put Jesus on that stand to show Barabbas that it was not his own fault. Everything that he had done deserved the penalty. And Jesus took that exchange. His plan for the foundation. When we get to verse 16, and the soldiers led him away inside the palace. That is the governor's headquarters, and they called together the whole battalion. And they clothed him in purple cloak, and twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on him. Now we know purple is a kingly or royal color. Put it on Jesus. Maybe the same guys who unlocked chains from Barabbas. Got to go and scourge him and beat him nearly to death. Let's put a robe on him. Let's go talk to this king. Another one, maybe a couple took some thorns, crushed him onto his head. We're even told that they beat him again with some greetings, probably crushing thorns deeper into his flesh and his skull. We also know that because of Genesis 3, because sin enters the world, one of the products of sin is thorns and thistles. And Jesus wears it as a king, a very different king. Enduring even that curse. Verse 18, and they began to salute him, Hail, King of the Jews. And they were striking his head with a reed and spitting on him and kneeling down in homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the purple cloak, put his own clothes on him, and they led him out to crucify him. The greatest substitution, the greatest exchange. Barabbas is going to lead to the greatest exchange of either. Isaiah 53 tells us that it was by his wounds and stripes that we are healed. The
Jesus. You couldn't even tell who he was. They beat him so badly. His followers had left. He's there alone. He does it because he loves us. Now let's talk about a big idea this morning. When we look at this story, we see who Barabbas really is. I don't think that's me. That's you. That's us. We know who we deserve. Barabbas. We are Barabbas. And yet, God loved Barabbas too. And a lot of times we want to say, it's not fair. It doesn't seem right. I don't get it. Why? He's a murderer. He's a rebel. He's a horrible, bad person. And are we so different? What if Barabbas never acknowledges or worships the one true God? Is it still worth it? Yes. How do we know? We read Romans 5:12, the promise of Paul's letter. While we're still sinners, Christ died for us. He didn't come for us to make accomplishments, do things, penance on our own. For that's impossible. We can't earn righteousness. And yet I think we forget it so easily. The thing I've been personally wanting to look at over the last weeks, or really looking at what's so amazing about grace. Just how beautiful grace is. Because we still want to earn it sometimes, don't we? We still want to try, like, I should probably do something because I did do that. No! That is the opposite of the gospel. That's not the gospel. We can't earn any of it. What did Barabbas do to earn any of it? Nothing. He deserved the cross. He probably saw his friends already executed up there next, which was his place. Maybe he walked by Jesus that day and said, that should have been me. I see my buddies next to him. That was us. That should have been us. It's Barabbas. That's us. And then we see how beautiful grace is. I think until we see how devastating and brutal it all is. The curse of sin, how much it has infiltrated every single area of culture in our world, and that we can't do anything to earn the love of the Father, but that He lavishes His love on us. We can't do it on our own. There's only one who can. There's only one who can take the sin and the shame and the brutality and the sin of the world upon himself. We see Barabbas, but I think we also see ourselves. And Jesus looks over and says, no, take me. Take me. This is the whole purpose for it. This is the gospel message. That no one is too far. And that's the amazing love of our Father. That's what's so amazing about grace. It was Jesus all along. It will always be Jesus. Jesus is the only sufficient answer. For those who are far and for those who are near. That every time we look at the cross, we say, I deserve it not, but blessed be the name of Jesus. And then we celebrate. This is why we worship. This is why we sing songs. That's why we get to respond in a few minutes with one another. And this is what I want you to ask people as we turn our chairs around. One of two things. This is how I've experienced grace this week. Not 5 years ago, this week. Let's just share them. And some of you are probably now thinking, I don't know if I've experienced grace this week. I've kind of been beating myself up all week. This goes to question number 2. I want to say, I don't know if I've experienced grace. I've looked at the beauty of the scandalous cross, what Jesus has done on my behalf. I don't know if I've experienced by people who walked into me and said, I need to stop doing all these things. Would you pray for me in that? That I might be reminded of the grace of God daily. That I might preach the gospel to myself daily. That it's not about anything that I've done, it's always been about what He's done. So take this time, move your chairs around one another, and talk about grace. Let's just talk about grace. What is so amazing?